today we're talking with Dermot O'Brien on the future of the CHRO and leading through transformation. First, I'll just share a little bit about Findem. Findem is a talent acquisition platform powered by AI, and we help companies with talent acquisition from source to hire. So Findem is really about finding all those people out in the various talent pools, the interested, the known, the unknown, the referred, and finding the ones who are going to be your next amazing hire. So great. I'd like to welcome Dermot O'Brien today. Dermot joins us. Yeah, great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate the invite and to be here with everybody.
Fantastic. So we'll just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll be recording the session today and send that out to you. You'll receive a link by email, and you can share that and watch it again. Also, you can always connect with us on the website findem.ai. Finally, just put any questions that you have in the QA area, and we'll address those after we've had a little bit of a chat. So as I said, Dermot is joining us today, and we're so excited. Dermot has over 20 years of reporting to CEOs and 30 years leading HR teams. He comes most recently from ADP, where he was the Chief Transformation Officer, and he's got some stories to tell about that. And before that, he was the CHRO at ADP, TIAA, and several other organizations. So also just want to share with where Dermot is today. So he's joined the Semper Virens VC fund, and it's kind of fun to hear about how he's taking all that knowledge and everything he learned in these large organizations and helping smaller organizations and startups put that to use. So excited to hear about that as well. And also just want to acknowledge that he is a fellow and on the board of the National Academy for Human Resources. And finally, one of the reasons why we're excited to talk to him about this topic of transformation is that he has a contributed essay in the book by Ian Ziskin, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. And your essay, Transformation in Action, is a great story sharing about ADP and your work there. So welcome, Dermot. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. Thanks again.
Wonderful. So let's just get started with maybe talking, let's set the frame a little bit with, what do we mean by transformation? It's such a big, word. What exactly do we mean by that? And maybe even thinking about with your experience with both the mature companies on that side and the innovators, the startups.
Yeah, well, you're right. Everybody's using transformation. I actually almost can't be in a conversation for the past few years where that word is not used a lot, whether it's a function, whether it's entire organization. For me, as we were going through this big shift at ADP, we really want to be specific. It's nice to have soft things, but it's also really fun when you're driving towards someplace to actually have very clear goals. So we sort of set it up and defined it as a step change in performance. So really be clear. So in that case, for a step change in performance, what are you measuring around performance, and how big is a step change? So that was kind of one way that we kind of thought about it, just to make it more tangible for people. When you and I were talking last week, I also think about transformation, especially in large organizations. My own experience is that companies that fail to innovate, fail to have continuous improvement at the necessary speed or clip, end up having to do this sort of big catch up, this big transformation. And so I think companies need to stay very alert and aware that they're not losing ground, they're not losing sight again of their progress, because it will just come back to haunt them at some point with a big effort, which is always tough to drive big, deep change in an organization. I do think, though, then that startups, which is different in many ways, because in many ways the startups are creating these innovations, these tools, these abilities for organizations, small, medium, large, to actually transform. So I think they're almost accelerators, for the organizations trying to transform. So I think some of the startups are so young, they don't need to necessarily transform, but they need to innovate, they need to adapt as well, as they kind of get through speed. That's how I kind of think about the big scaled organizations and some of the smaller startup types.
Right. It's almost as if the startups are sort of agents of change. They're kind of helping the larger organizations with that transformation and maybe playing the role there, being kind of those disruptors. And as we see, some will succeed and some will not.
Sure.
But bringing all that they're really bringing some of that innovation into those different industries. And just, I think we also would be remiss if we did not recognize that part of the catalyst for this so much transformation being so much in the conversation today is just because we have gone through a couple of years of really massive change and kind of just companies having to pivot, change, adapt really quickly. And we're even seeing that just continue, that if you, as you say, if you're not alert to what's happening and making some of these agile adjustments, then you're going to have a big catch up to do when you finally, I guess, wake up to the change that's happening, right?
Yeah, and some of those, the recent ones you said the last few years, they're sort of unique in the sense of our lifetime. So, there's change which is always happening, and okay, it may have been happening over here, now it's happening here, but some of the like pandemic and what's happened, these were uncharted waters. These were all risk management scenarios, contingency plans that people in theory were meant to be working out. But what actually happened, I would say, was so different than what's on the bookshelves in terms of the plans.
Right. Sometimes you just have to say, okay, let's start new. But yeah, tell us about ADP. So you were Chief Transformation Officer there, maybe from when to when, and what was the catalyst event? I don't think it was the pandemic, right? It happened before that.
It was before that. So I did 6 years, with Carlos Rodriguez, who's the CEO, who was had been inside ADP and had become CEO, but he was driving big changes himself, especially in investment in technology and innovation. And it's a big company. 60,000 people around the world. So a lot that needed to be done to make sure that it repositioned itself for ongoing success. But then, and you're not in control of situations sometimes, we had a big activist investor in Pershing Square, Bill Ackman, came in, it was in 2018. It was probably actually 17, the tail end when that happened. He was very aggressive, as you'd expect, in terms of board seats, management changes, et cetera, and financial returns expected. ADP has a great history of financial returns, of very loyal investors, and so at the end of the day, it was a lot of work, but ADP won the proxy battle, significantly. So that was a real distraction, I think, for a lot of the people in the management team. What came out of that, which was the catalyst, for a lot of this change, and the creation of this new role that I was asked to run, which is Chief Transformation Officer, was really the commitments made to the investors in the process of the proxy. And ADP, typical of a lot of companies, they give guidance out maybe a year. It never had to give multiple year financial guidance. And in this process, we ended up being in a position of making commitments out 3 years. Again, with a meaningful trajectory in increase versus our historical, let's say averages in terms of financials. So enter Dermot. So my job was to really deliver on the commitments made to investors. Didn't want it to be so one-dimensional just on, what the shareholders needed. We really wanted to make this multidisciplinary and have really all our big stakeholders. So what could we do in a transformation effort that would achieve great results for our shareholders, that would achieve great results for our clients, because we kind of think they're all connected, and operate and treat our people well. So there's great results coming from the labor force, the 60,000 people inside ADP. So we try to really make it, think about a balanced scorecard. How can we set big goals that are complementary to these outcomes that we were stating, and where the retention in the system, so we wouldn't overplay financial results on the backs of people, let's say, or overplay financial results with sort of a negative impact on clients. And that was really what we went about doing. And that was really the purpose of the Transformation Office, for a 3-year period. It has continued since I retired a little over a year ago, and they're going gangbusters still. I saw them all about a month ago. But that was the genesis of it.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that you had this event that occurred, and but really it sounds like the leadership really took advantage of that to make a significant change. And I'm also hearing that that balance between the customers, the investors, and the employees is really critical, especially when you're talking about such a large group of people, 60,000 employees.
Yeah.
When I was looking through the essay that you wrote, so very helpful, and it's a great resource for folks. But you talked a lot about the importance of defining success, and also you came from this role of CHRO. So maybe help us understand, like, how did you define success for your team that you created for this, and also how did you define success for the company? And maybe share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that, because to me, and I see a lot of gaps in this, when people are starting something big, they almost like, let's go. They're just out of the gate, but there's no real integrated, purpose-built, design sort of plan. That of course you want it to be flexible and agile, but do you know where you're going? Do you know what you're trying to achieve? And do we all know? Because, again, it's a lot of people. So to me, defining success is the number one thing you got to do. And part of that is another sort of principle I have, which is keeping things simple. So you saw in the essay, I always think people are smart, but organizations are dumb. So the reason I say that is because, you have to keep it super simple to have so many people who are in different roles in different countries actually follow along and play a role and help you achieve what it is you're ultimately trying to set out to achieve. So I think defining your success. So at ADP, what we did, again, as part of the step change in performance, we had a bit of a change effort underway prior with Carlos, the CEO, around the innovation side of things. So we had a bit of a mantra called simplify, innovate, and grow. It was a familiar set of terms and lenses for the people of the company to look at. So we call this thing win as one, which, it's not unusual here. Other companies use things like that, but it's really about us all winning. Our clients, our shareholders, our associates, is how they call it at ADP. And so we had this win as one umbrella. We created these 3 areas: innovate, simplify, innovate, and grow. We put 3 big, huge goals under each. So we had 9 goals. Why 9? It's just, we looked at the things we had to focus on, and it just worked out that we could fit, equally important big things in each of these. And they were big. So that's the other thing. I think when you're making the transformation, the step change in performance, it can't be just like a 1-foot hurdle. So for example, the 3 goals that we put under grow, so simplify, innovate, and grow, the big outcome goals, right? No inputs, no about efforts, all about outcomes. And one of them was to achieve record-setting retention in the company. So the company being around 70-something years, we wanted to have the best retention ever, over this time period, because in the business model, retention is probably the most valuable thing. We all love new business, but you do not want it going out, the drain plug, in the bathtub. You need to retain your business and grow on top of that. So that was super important for the financial results and for investors. The second one was NPS, Net Promoter Score, really the measure of how we're doing with our clients. And we want to make big strides. And so I think a lot of the business unit presidents, swallowed hard when I came in and said, we have to achieve 100% from today's level over these 3 years in terms of our NPS. People were kind of shocked, but we talked a lot about, forget about the activist investor, think about where we are. We have a chance, to your point, embracing this, getting to a better place competitively. And we want to be very meaningful. I can tell you in hindsight, both of those, things have been achieved. In fact, the NPS was exceeded, which I never would have imagined. I thought we bit off like a massive number. And the third one was really a hardcore sort of financial number, accounting number. It was called, adjusted EBIT, earning before interest and taxes. And it was a specific area that was being targeted. And we said we would get to results that were basically 2.5 times the trajectory of our like our prior few years averages, right? So this was a massive step up in the financial revenue and profit. Ultimately, that kind of feeds down into adjusted EBIT. And again, those kind of numbers were achieved. And I think there were big numbers. We had 3 others under these other simplify and innovate. And I think the reason they got achieved was just how everything was designed in an integrated fashion. It was simple. It was clear how we were doing. Everyone could understand the score. They could see how they could contribute to this. And we just had a lot of communications, as you can imagine, a lot of town halls. We had a quarterly update on our results, very transparent, almost like thermometers, how we're doing on these. Everybody could track. The CEO answered every single question personally that would go in this blog. So the transformation officer would own the blog, set it out, and then the CEO would be in there and doing it himself and answering people, the questions, or saying thank you to people who were sending kudos as we were achieving these things. So it was a very integrated process that I think we got up 60,000 people rowing pretty much in the same direction.
Wow, it's really a remarkable achievement. And I just want to remind folks who are listening, we do have a QA section, so feel free to drop any questions that you have into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I'm hearing is, having these big audacious goals, getting everybody behind them, just having everybody bought into that, and really recognizing, it sounds like even though, sometimes you think, well, you've got to have achievable goals, but it sounds like even you were maybe doubting whether or not these were achievable, but you wanted to put them out there anyway. I know we talked a little bit about incentives, and I'm sure that the audience, our talent acquisition audience, is really going to be interested in the HR audience. So what role did incentives play? How did you get each individual kind of behind these goals and make it matter for them that you were successful?
I'll talk about 2 things, because again, there's nice words I'm saying here. There's nice energy, for encouraging people, but there was a lot of design, easy design, like not big, heavy friction stuff. And I'll talk about the second one in a minute, but the actual incentives, win as one. We wanted everyone to win. So the way we designed it was, starting at the top, we made sure that the executive team of the company, beyond certain financials they had 40% in sort of strategically important areas. So we changed out those areas to be these 6 goals. And so the top team were CEO to me, et cetera, were all incented together against the progress for these big goals. Anyone else who was in a bonus eligible place, we made like 25% of their bonus. So anyone else in the company bonus eligible, 25% was driven off of how well the company did with its NPS goal, company-wide. So this is part of being a team sport now, as opposed to an individual sport of your business unit. Of course, we care how you did in your own business unit, but for this measure, it had to be that we were achieving overall for the company. And what we noticed happening was people were saying, hey, I can help you over here if you're failing. I got some capacity. So there's incentive to help others to achieve it, because everyone, would gain if we got the numbers. And then the other thing we did, so that was very much tied into the comp, as you can imagine, for, again, a lot of bonus eligible people, but half the company were not bonus eligible. So for the first time ever, we created a plan that would fund a bonus pool potentially on 2 criteria. And because we really want to get people involved, and we would pay them out 0 of their base salary, 0 to 5% of your base salary, if 2 of our basically 9 goals were met. So one is we had to exceed the financial goals for the year, because we needed to create money to pay the pool. And so if we exceeded, we would take that excess, put it in a pool. That gave us some money to play with. However, now getting that was good, but not good enough. We had to achieve the NPS goals for the year. So that meant if our clients were happy and we had some extra money, given the goals we set, we could pay out. And I can tell you it was like 4% the first year. It was 0% the second year because of COVID, because it really affected headwinds for everybody. 5% the third year, and then it was actually, they've kept it going, and it was 5% last year. So there's been a great payout again for this population, so important, 50% of the company. But all that incentive was designed, again, from the beginning, and along with the communications and keeping things simple, people could track and say, hey, this could be a good year for me. This may not be the greatest year, whatever it was. And it just got people rallying and, with good energy. The second thing I was mentioning about designing and things is, I always say, if you want to change the outcomes, you got to change the routines. You have to change the routines. So in doing this review, the Transformation Office really became the forum, the vehicle for accountability, visibility, moving, decisions forward, getting obstacles out of the way. So we had set up bi-weekly meetings. So every 2 weeks, the executive team would meet for 2 hours. And instead of big 186-page decks, that I get say 5 pages, we would do a prep session with them before. We'd pick on 5 subject matters that we were going after. And there was nowhere to hide, but it was a very supportive environment. And it was about clearing the path to the goals that we were trying to achieve. And again, everybody took part in that. The CEO joined in from vacation early on. So everyone said, hey, I better really join these meetings because I really could miss out, or decisions could be made that could affect my business because we're making the decisions for the company in these meetings. So that was key in hindsight as well, was having this rigor, this tempo, and it was very clear whether we were winning, whether we were struggling, whether we were losing. And that's what I like. I like, again, this defined success. You know where you are, you know where you stand, and you can, rally people accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. And it makes me first want to be on your team because it sounds like so much fun. But also I think it just really shows that, giving people a goal and bringing them together and giving them the opportunity to do what they do best to achieve that goal really can make a difference for a whole organization. I mean, it's so interesting to see, each individual being able to turn this 60,000 people organization and really be transformative. I want to touch a little bit on the role of the CHRO. In the title of this, we talked about the future of the CHRO. And one of the things I think I'm hearing is that at ADP, the CHRO really had a seat at the executive table. It sounds like, you're playing a very strategic role. So maybe talk a little bit about why, because Chief Transformation Officer could have been from any number of different departments within the organization. So why do you think, as a HR leader, you really fit that role?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'd say half the management team went into the CEO because, again, it's what you do when you're in crisis is, hey, if you think I can help, I'm here to help. And so there was a lot of us that went in individually. And I think the reason Carlos selected me was because he really saw how we, in the prior 6 years, in a lot of the work we were doing in HR. Now I call HR the function, the small h, the small r, but the big H, the big R is the people side across the business, across the countries, right? That's, sort of the human element of the business is the big H, the big R. And so we did a lot of work. I love joining ADP. It was very different. I was 25 years in financial services. ADP is a human capital management company. I'm like, this is a wonderful, maybe unique opportunity where you get to come in. HR was not actually viewed that strategically. In fact, I would say, I don't think it's fair to say it was broken. So we really changed it. So for example, one of my first few executive team meetings, I went in, ADP itself was a big client, as you can imagine, all its tools and platforms and services, but they weren't the latest versions, for example. And I remember one of the heads of the businesses telling me, no, we take care of our external clients first. And I said, you know what, I understand that, but I think we should flip the switch here and actually turn the totem pole upside down, because if we can all be using the most recent, versions and what's in the market, we'll actually be living it for our clients. So a salesperson won't be like, I'm selling you this product. They're like, I'm selling you this experience because I use it as an associate inside ADP. And so we flipped the switch. We actually got HR lined up with the technology groups and the product development groups. So they're still, to this day, HR is sort of a part of the product roadmap, because again, the end users are the end clients are HR people. So I was lucky. Carlos is an amazing guy as a CEO. the management team, they really took me, and I was the outsider. You getting to know my personality a little bit. I'm well able for a good fight, but I don't like it. I much rather we agree to focus on what we're going to focus on. And if that means I've got to give up something, because it's more important for someone else that it's the, let's do that. But let's be clear. Let's not be working against each other. So I think how we made the changes in the HR stuff before really is what Carlos saw. And the role we played, I'd say, in two particular areas. We really transformed the talent process, the outcomes, really transformed it, and the performance, and incentive, kind of area as well. So that had a huge impact, as you can imagine, on who the leaders are, how they're rewarded. And there, again, a lot of big changes that went on there, added to the transformation office. I was telling you last week, I think it's a good outcome number. When I joined ADP, and again, I just joined in a journey, so I'm not saying this is me. I know I played a role. A lot of people played a role, and I was fortunate timing too, because it was $46 a share. It was a $24 billion company. Today, it's like $250 a share, and it's $100 billion company. So this is a company that people probably know about and probably think, oh, ADP, it's been around a while, but it has transformed dramatically, and it's not done. I was just talking to someone the other day who's a president of one of the big businesses, and they are excited about what they're doing and kind of moving the ball forward. So I do think there was a good timing there with the leader, with the strategy around investing in products, and then just an openness to experiment as a human capital management company. And we put the mirror up to ourselves and said, hey, if we're going to be a leading provider of human capital management, how are we as a practitioner? So we did a lot of work in HR transforming the small h, the small r, the big H, the big R, using that lens. Let's put the mirror up to ourselves. Let's hold ourselves accountable, and let's give ourselves several years to make it better, which we did. And so I think that's why, it ended up being, sort of me. And tied to that, I actually brought in my two lieutenants that I went into the transformation office. You may be going here next, some of the people. And it was sort of the opposite of what some people might think. Like I was still in theory, the outsider, being a few years at ADP, because there's a lot of long-term people there. But I actually picked two deep-rooted people. So they knew the place, they knew the business, they knew the culture, and obviously they knew the people, which is the most important. One of them, Deb Hughes, SVP in HR, she's just amazing in terms of how she operates. She's always changing and innovating herself. So even though she's been there, many, many, many years, she's a change agent. Proved to be critical picking Deb, in terms of the change management, the communications, the thoughtfulness around the human elements of change. And then also I picked a guy, John Bjornson, who was a finance person, another long-term ADP, but always changing and reinventing himself. Very well regarded, both of them, in terms of their interactions with people. And he had actually run a business unit. He'd been in senior finance roles as well. So having someone with a strong financial backbone, having someone with strong cultural people practices. They were two key lieutenants. We created a small team in the transformation office. We deliberately kept it small in case we had to fold up tent at some point. We didn't want to create this big, this big monster. If there's any extended talent to do with this transformation work, it's in the businesses to deliver on the goals that are being set. And it's a much better model than having a central place kind of accumulate all that skill set. Because at the end of the day, it shouldn't be probably forever. A transformation office should be there to enable, to help, and then mainstream and kind of get out of the way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we talked about last time that you also had some outside help. And again, you brought that in a really methodical way, an intentional way, I should say, where that idea of, we're going to, and I think that also helps a lot with all of the change management around, we're not going to be doing this forever. We're going to go out there, we're going to do this work, we're going to see the results, and then we're going to, will have changed. So the transformation is done. Did you want to maybe share with us a little bit about how you worked with EY and what role they played? Maybe a little bit about the technology as well, the technologies that you're using.
Yeah, so that we had several. In fact, there was another big consulting firm in there prior to me getting in the seat, and with an absolutely massive price tag for something that was actually hard to understand what they were suggesting. So We didn't use them. And we ended up using EY. They were a great partner. I'm a big believer that consultants can be valuable. They should not be leading. It should be the leaders leading, and then they're helping, from behind the scenes, or giving input. But they should not be the people out in front driving this. This is your company, our company. This is the way things should work. So they were very good with that. And they brought, and when we really had them in for big help at the beginning, and then we scaled it down over 2. So ultimately, then we parted ways, at least in terms of the needs with regard to the transformation office. Again, exactly as we designed it, so it just didn't become a permanent cost. That was going to stay. We took advantage of some restructuring costs that you get when you are transforming, and those are usually in the beginning years. So you can't also continue that. So we took advantage of that to get an investment in this. They had some very good tools around tracking. So in our bi-weekly meeting with the executive team, we would have all these other meetings during the week. We'd do deep dives on topics. We would have this whole project plan. So we had 9 big goals I mentioned, but we also had 50 initiatives that were these active things that were going, and we tracked them through a toll gate process, from ideation to the realization, and that technology supporting that, and having all the visual displays of progress, gaps, really came from EY. And that was, again, very helpful just in terms of the transparency. All the leaders could look it up. They all had access. And I think having that help, was definitely worthwhile. So we did that with them. And again, I think for them, and, they learned a lot. The partner in charge that we dealt with said they learned a ton, which they, then I'm sure have turned around and sold to other clients in terms of new ways of doing things.
That's great. So that's where to go if you're looking for help with this kind of a transformation process, right? To that team. So let's talk maybe a little bit about talent acquisition, because Findem is a talent acquisition platform, and a lot of the folks who may have joined us today might be from that space. So, as a company is transforming, you still have to have that pipeline of people coming in. And also, I think in that transformation process, maybe you're shifting the skills that you need and what you're looking for. So do you have any sort of lessons learned or any insights, anything that you would want to share about that talent acquisition process?
Yes. Yeah. Well, look, having owned it in the sense of the CHRO seat, and a place like ADP, for example, 60,000 people, was probably hiring 17,000 people a year. So you realize over a few years, like, you could really have a totally different company, in 3 years, in 5 years. And I think you don't want to just do that in a, let's call it, massive transactional way. I think you want to be quite deliberative in terms of how you think about the strategic impact of that. So yes, part of our changes were, sometimes we had areas where the skill set was no longer needed. We had a big effort in the 3rd year of this transformation around digital. It was an area where we had to invest. So we had to not only kind of use some of the funds that were out there in the technology group and finance, but we also had to go to Carlos and say, look, we're going to need, $120 million to invest in these tools. Payback won't be in 1 year, but it will start to show. And, those are fun conversations, when you're trying to deliver these other financial commitments, and now you're asking for an investment, which just adds obviously to the pain. But it helped and it worked. And the talent acquisition team played a big role in making sure, because we knew it was like, there's some people who have probably the aptitude for some of these things, but they don't have the skill set. And it was fairly new for ADP. So we had to start thinking about how can we source, deploy in an effective way these resources now that we get from the outside market. And that was all talent acquisition that had to be repositioned to do that. ADP, like probably a lot of companies, the talent acquisition team is very strong. There's had some amazing leaders in there. It's talent is such a critical known part of ADP's culture.
Great. Yeah. And they do work with Findem. So we are in working with the talent acquisition team, and is a really terrific team. And it's great to see that transformation goes through, and bringing new people in and making sure that you're kind of continuing to build the workforce. I mean, one of the things we say is, you're kind of building tomorrow's company today, right? Like those hires that you bring in today are really going to make or break like how innovation happens and where you go as an organization.
Yes.
I think one of the last area in the essay that you wrote, you talked about the importance of transparency and communication. I think you've touched on that a little bit, but maybe we can say a little bit more about, making sure, and there's maybe the transparency within the organization, but then there's also the transparency externally, or to the shareholders and customers and others. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the communications, and because communicating change to customers is also tricky, and letting them know that the thing that they have used forever is changing, or whatever that case may be. So maybe talk a little bit about transparency to those three groups: the investors, the customers, and the employees.
Yeah, so, and it's a great question. And look, a lot of people, I'm sure, say, hey, yeah, transparency is important, but a lot of people get scared, with transparency, because they feel like they lose control of at certain points, depending on how the results are looking. I think you have to have confidence, true confidence, and faith in the organization and the people to deliver, to be very forthright with the results. Again, people are smart, treat them as adults. And so if anything, I think I was pushing the PR folks a little hard, like this. Hey, you can't say that, you can't do that, because we haven't had our earnings yet. And it's true, and we knew certain, obviously, parameters, but some of the things that we want to say inside in these quarterly updates. So we started to create the quarterly updates after, like, a week after the earnings calls, just to make sure there was no concern, or confusion with that. And then, yes, there was a big effort around, for example, as we moved to digital. And so more digital tools being used to deliver the technology or the service at ADP, right? So now you're changing, maybe a great thing, but you can't assume that the client, because clients are busy, they got a million things going on. Maybe they're not, they don't think what they have from you is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but they're also not maybe looking for a big change right now because they've got this and that, budgets and year end and all this fun stuff. So there was a lot of outreaches, to sort of, within reason, I say, because at some point you really want people to use these things, but it was never forced down. It was never forced, well, this is version 3.5, and hold your nose open wide, and here's what you and there's some of that I'm sure was done in the past or historical ways in companies, but now I think it's like, let's do it on their time frame. So also the technologies to be able to get that customized feedback, right, from the client saying, not now, but maybe in 2 months, not now, maybe in 6 months. And so I think there was a sensitivity to that. It wasn't all just about what we wanted to achieve. At the end of the day, we wanted to achieve it at its true purpose, which is to enable our clients. And so you don't want to have a good thing screwed up just because you're pushing against a timeline or a spreadsheet. Right. So there was a lot of work done. A lot of client success groups actually even sort of expanded during this time at ADP, just make sure that the sensitivity of stuff going through the pipeline, wasn't going to implode, as it got to the desks, of the clients. But it is so important. I've seen too many times over the years, again, people, the big change going on in the company. People are like, do you know what's going on? I don't know what's going on. You've got people saying, oh, this is the worst thing, this is the best thing. And you're kind of like, how could that be? And I think a lot of that is because people don't define success. If you arm wrestle up front all the issues around defining success, it'll be hugely helpful, because then you can say later on down the road, okay, now we're ready to change how we define success. But as of now, we know we've been successful because this is how we defined it. And it's very clear, or you're not achieving it. So again, I think part of that transparency is just really, really focused, for people. And it's hard, keeping it simple. I always, that term, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter note, a shorter letter. When you're trying to do these things, simplify, innovate, and grow, you really got to be crisp. It's got to be understood, to someone helping you in India, to the Philippines, to Prague, right, to New Jersey. So there's a lot of work that goes into the being succinct and the crisp nature of what you're trying to do, because again, all of that just becomes a burden for people to kind of get around and get over to actually do what you want them to do, which is line up and help deliver results.
Yeah, and obviously the results are there. I mean, when we say, getting, bringing your customers through this change and achieving the NPS scores, that really says that you succeeded, and getting the financial returns. And then I can't imagine that I can imagine that there's also great goodwill with the company when they've all achieved and had a part in the benefit of that achievement as well, and through the incentives. So it sounds like a really terrific effort. Well, we're getting near the end of our time, so I just want to maybe bring it into the present. We've talked a lot about ADP and kind of your past, but maybe share with us what you're excited about now as you kind of head into this advisory and role where you're helping smaller organizations get up and running.
I've had a goal for a number of years. Don't ask me why. Probably a lot of reasons, to retire at 55, which I did. So I retired.
Congratulations.
June last year. Thank you. I'm 56 now, and I run a lot, so I can still move, and I think I can still help. But I wanted to life has been good to me. I'm a kid from Ireland originally, and went to a community college that got a transfer scholarship to Pace University, and been very good. I've had some great leaders just take me under their wing and give me a lot of support. But you kind of go, when's enough? And so that was, to me, 55. I want to take a time out, I was calling it, whether that's 18 months, whether it's 24 months, whether it's for the rest of my life. And we sold our New York home. We kind of built a place down in Naples. I'm in Naples now for the past 10 days. And it's been fabulous. So I'm in no rush to go back to the intense schedule owning, kind of environment that I felt. So it feels good. But having said that, I also think there's roles you can still learn in, you can still, contribute to. And one of them, I was playing a role prior to leaving ADP when I joined Semperviren's, this executive advisory group of active and retired heads of HR in terms of investments in startup, typically in the workplace, healthcare, a little bit of fintech. That was new for me. So I'd been in financial services, but it was all institutional and retail. I'd never really been around VC space. So I said, well, I love to learn and I like to contribute. So if I can learn this would be a pretty interesting space. And then if I can contribute, because they're trying to actually develop solutions for buyers like CHRO, so buyers like me when I was working. And so it's been great. I probably have about 5 now. I've got to be careful I don't overload. They're all very good. It's not a huge commitment of time. I'm so impressed by the innovation, the speed, the thoughtfulness of these young people. It's incredible, trying to solve some really tough problems. And I think HR needs more help in, let's call it, the science side of things, versus the art of HR. We know that, we've been working it, but there's still lots of opportunity for different and new tools, hopefully working together better. But that's what I'm seeing here. And so to me, it's great. I'm on the National Academy of Human Resources Foundation I told you about. And for people who don't know or listen to this, they should check out the NAHR. It's a great organization. So that's sort of a not-for-profit thing. I sit on a capital campaign committee at my alma mater there at Pace University. And then I've got about 5 of these venture-related things. And I find it good and it's exciting, and it's do it for a year. And if you both like each other, you continue it. If you don't, you move on. It's nice.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out to spend with us today. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your time and the opportunity to share this story with you and this excitement. And I'm excited to see where this space goes. I think there is a lot of opportunity for change right now. Whenever things are, challenging, it's really an opportunity if you've got the right mindset. So hopefully that's the mindset that we all have, and we can go out and make a difference. Thank you. You can stop by Findem.ai to learn more about Findem. We'll also include the link to the Transformation essay book by Ian Ziskin in our follow-up email. So you'll all have the link to that as well. And have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Karen.
Take